The stars outside the window of the command ship looked like diamonds scattered across a void, calm, serene, and utterly indifferent to the chaos unfolding within the ship. Inside, Commander Elias stood at the helm, eyes fixed on the flickering screen in front of him. His fingers hovered above the controls as the final countdown ticked down to 0. He was facing a choice that would shape the fate of every living being in the galaxy. The mission was clear: enter the black hole, complete the test that every other species had failed, and return with the knowledge that could change everything. Yet, deep within him, something nagged at his thoughts, something that even the most calculated scientist would never have dared to consider. "Commander, we're ready," said Lieutenant Sarah, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. But even she couldn't mask the trace of doubt in her eyes. No one had succeeded in passing the test that lay ahead. Species far more advanced than humanity had tried and failed. The prospect of entering a black hole, a force of nature so powerful it could tear apart not only matter but the very fabric of time itself, was something most would deem impossible. Yet here they were, humanity's last hope, standing at the precipice. Elias' heart raced as he gazed at the image on the screen. It was hard to believe, but there it was, a swirling mass of pure darkness, the event horizon drawing them in like an invisible hand. This was no ordinary test, it was a test of life itself. For the past few decades, every species that had tried to pass it had failed, their fates sealed within the confines of the black hole's heart. And yet, something stirred within Elias. Something deeper than fear or uncertainty, a spark of something distinctly human, the will to fight, to defy the odds. "Status report," Elias commanded. "We're holding steady," Sarah replied. "The black hole's gravity is different this time. It's stronger than we expected." "Keep us steady," Elias ordered, his voice low but firm. He turned to face his crew. His team. They were his family now, united by a singular purpose: to succeed where others had failed. "Commander, you sure about this?" asked another voice, a younger officer named Kale. "It doesn't feel right. No one's ever come back from something like this. The others, they never even stood a chance." Elias' gaze met Kale's. "I'm sure," he said, his words carrying weight. "Humanity's greatest strength isn't in our technology. It's in our heart, our will to survive." There was a pause, a long silence, heavy with unspoken doubts and fears, but it was a silence born of resolve. "We'll do it," Elias said with unwavering confidence. "For humanity." Suddenly, the ship's systems began to hum, and the entire vessel lurched forward, its engine straining against the pull of the black hole. The crew's faces were illuminated by the eerie glow of the monitors, their expressions a mix of determination and disbelief. The test had begun, and there was no turning back. Just then, something unexpected happened. A voice, a strange, distorted voice, echoed across the ship's speakers, cutting through the tension. "Every species failed. But Deathworlders? They'll be different." It was a chilling declaration, one that sent shivers down Elias' spine. The voice belonged to a mysterious figure they had never seen. There was no identifying signal, no clue as to who, or what, was speaking. All they had were those words, and the unsettling truth that they now had to prove them wrong. Elias looked at his crew one last time. "Let's show them what humanity is made of." The countdown had ended. The ship entered the black hole. The feeling of weightlessness enveloped Elias and his crew as the ship plunged deeper into the black hole. The once calm and serene void outside had transformed into a swirling tempest of unimaginable forces. Time itself seemed to bend and stretch, twisting and distorting in ways that defied comprehension. The walls of the ship groaned under the strain as if the very fabric of the universe was pressing against them, threatening to tear them apart. For a moment, the ship seemed to hang suspended in an infinite void, silent, still, as if suspended between worlds. But it was only an illusion, the calm before the storm. The crew held their breath, eyes wide, trying to make sense of what they were experiencing. "Status report," Elias demanded, his voice steady despite the rising tension in the room. "Gravity is fluctuating wildly," Lieutenant Sarah responded, her fingers flying across the controls, trying to stabilize their position. "We've passed the event horizon, Commander. It's unlike anything we've ever seen. The readings, they don't match anything in our databases." Elias clenched his jaw. There was no going back now. They were in uncharted territory, and the outcome was uncertain, but he had made his decision. Humanity's survival rested on their success. "Keep us steady," he said, his voice resolute. The crew worked in synchrony, their every move born from years of training. Yet, despite their skill and experience, there was a growing sense of unease that none of them could shake. It was more than just the physical strain of being trapped in the grip of a black hole. It was something deeper, something primal that resonated in their very bones. "We're seeing strange fluctuations in the time dilation," Cale said, his voice trembling. "The past, the future, it's all blurring together." Elias turned to look at the young officer, but before he could respond, the ship lurched violently. The sudden force sent them all stumbling, throwing the crew into a chaotic frenzy. "Brace for impact," Elias shouted, gripping the edge of his console as the ship twisted violently. For a moment, it felt as though they were falling, tumbling through the fabric of time and space. It was impossible to tell how long they were in freefall. Seconds? Minutes? Hours? Everything had become a blur. The familiar hum of the engines was replaced by an eerie silence, as if the ship had left behind the very laws of physics. They were in the heart of the void now, and everything that had once been certain was now uncertain. Then, without warning, the ship came to a sudden stop. Did we just stop?" Cale whispered, his voice laced with disbelief. "I think so," Sarah responded, staring at her console with wide eyes. "But, how? We should be in freefall. We should be." The ship's lights flickered, and suddenly, a voice cut through the silence, a voice that sent chills down their spines. "Welcome, Deathworlders. You've made it farther than any species before you. But the true test is only beginning." The voice, distorted and cold, echoed throughout the ship. There was no source, no visible presence. It was as if the black hole itself was speaking to them. Elias's heart pounded in his chest. This was the test, the moment that would determine everything. Humanity had come this far, but they had no idea what awaited them. What had gone wrong? Why were they still alive? The black hole had consumed every other species, yet here they were, standing at the edge of something even more terrifying than the unknown. Is it talking to us?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She was shaking, her mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. "It's not possible," Cale muttered, his face pale. Elias took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing thoughts. This was it. They had come this far, and there was no turning back now. "Listen to me," Elias said, his voice firm and commanding. "We've faced the impossible before, and we'll face it again. Humanity doesn't give up. We're going to see this through. All of us." His words carried weight, a reassurance that was needed more than ever. He could see the crew begin to steady themselves, the fear in their eyes replaced by a glimmer of determination. They had faced impossible odds before. They could do it again. Suddenly, the ship lurched again, but this time, it wasn't the shaking of the black hole. No, this was something different. The ship's control panels blinked and hummed erratically, and the walls seemed to shimmer as though reality itself was being distorted. A strange, almost alien presence filled the air, an energy that seemed to pulse through the very walls of the ship. The crew was no longer just in the black hole. They had crossed over into something far more dangerous, a place where the rules of reality had been bent beyond recognition. The true test had begun, and Elias knew they were being watched. The question was, would humanity survive, or would they too fall like every other species before them? The eerie voice still lingered in their minds as the ship drifted through the strange realm. The walls pulsed with a low hum, and the crew found themselves surrounded by a surreal, shifting atmosphere. Time itself seemed to waver, twisting as though reality was just a fragile thread. Everything was alive, moving in ways they couldn't understand. The ship was no longer just a vessel, it was a part of something far larger, something they were only beginning to comprehend. Elias felt a weight settle on his chest, the kind of pressure that no amount of training could have prepared him for. They had made it past the event horizon, but that didn't mean they were safe. In fact, the real danger was only just beginning. "Captain, we're receiving new readings," Lieutenant Sarah said, her voice tense. "It's not like anything we've ever seen before. The laws of physics, they're not applying here. We've been thrust into a realm that's beyond comprehension." Elias nodded, his eyes narrowing. "What exactly are we dealing with here?" "I don't know, sir. The data we're receiving doesn't align with any scientific theories we've developed. It's like we're standing on the precipice of something alien." Sarah's fingers flew across the console, but nothing seemed to help. The ship's systems were malfunctioning, glitches in the data creating more questions than answers. "Can we navigate?" Elias asked, his voice steely. "For now, yes," Sarah said. "But I don't know for how long. The deeper we go, the more unpredictable everything becomes." As Sarah continued her analysis, Elias turned toward the rest of the crew. They were all staring at the swirling void outside, trying to make sense of the situation. Cale was gripping the edge of his seat, his knuckles white with tension. He was visibly shaken, eyes darting nervously from one display to another. "Do you think we're being tested?" Cale asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elias turned, his gaze locking with the young officers. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I think it's more than just a test. It's a trial. One that could either break us or define us." Suddenly, the ship jerked violently, throwing the crew into a frenzy. The lights flickered and alarms blared as the entire vessel shuddered under an unseen force. It was as if the very fabric of space was tearing apart around them. "Stabilize. Now!" Elias barked. Sarah worked feverishly at the controls, her face pale with concentration. I can't stop it," she exclaimed. "We're being pulled in by something. It's not a force from the black hole, there's something else at play here." Before Elias could respond, the ship lurched again, this time with such force that it felt as though the entire hull was going to split in half. The screens went black, leaving them in a pitch-black void. The silence was suffocating, the absence of sound more terrifying than anything they had experienced before. "We're losing power," Sarah shouted. "We're not going to survive this if we can't regain control." Elias felt his pulse quicken. The pressure was mounting, and there was no room for error. The ship was their last hope. They had come this far, but now it seemed like the universe itself was conspiring against them. It was hard to tell what was real anymore. Then, as if responding to their desperation, the strange voice echoed once again, sending shivers down their spines. "The test begins now. Choose wisely. Fail, and you will be lost. Succeed, and your kind will rise." The voice was cold, detached, as if the speaker knew exactly what was at stake. There was no mercy in its tone, only a harsh, undeniable truth. Elias clenched his fists, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was no longer just about survival. This was about proving humanity's worth. They had been chosen, but for what purpose? Was this really a test? Or was it something far more sinister? "Stay focused," Elias ordered. We can't let fear control us. We face this together, no matter what happens. The crew nodded, but Elias could see the uncertainty in their eyes. They had no idea what was coming next. Neither did he. Just as quickly as the chaos had begun, the ship stilled. The alarms stopped. The darkness receded, replaced by a sickly green glow that illuminated the cockpit. It wasn't the black void they had seen before, it was something far more alien, as though they had passed through a portal into an entirely different dimension. Strange, glowing patterns swirled around them like living constellations, stretching and contracting in an intricate dance of light. "What is this?" Sarah breathed, her voice tinged with awe and fear. "I don't know," Elias said, staring out at the swirling patterns. It was both mesmerizing and terrifying. The beauty of the unknown was undeniable, but so was the overwhelming sense that they were being watched. The voice spoke again, louder now, reverberating through the ship. "You have crossed into the trial. It is here that the fate of your species will be decided." Elias took a deep breath, his mind racing. They had made it this far, but now came the real challenge. Would humanity rise to the occasion, or would they be another species lost to the void? "Prepare yourselves," Elias said, his voice steady, though his heart pounded in his chest. "We've faced the impossible before. We can face it again." With that, the crew braced themselves for the next phase of the test, knowing that whatever came next would challenge them in ways they couldn't even begin to understand. The shimmering glow of the unknown stretched around the ship like an impossible, alien landscape. It was both beautiful and utterly disconcerting. Nothing in their training could have prepared them for this moment. Every star, every galaxy, seemed distant now, lost in the swirling chaos of the trial. They were no longer travelers through space. They were participants in something far greater. "Captain," Sarah's voice broke through the tension, her fingers moving rapidly across the ship's console. "The ship's systems are reacting to the environment. It's adapting to the trial." "What does that mean?" Elias asked, his brow furrowed. He had never seen anything like this before. Nothing in human science or history even remotely resembled what they were encountering. "It means that the ship itself might be evolving. There's a pattern here," Sarah explained. "The longer we remain in this space, the more the ship's systems seem to align with the trial. It's almost as if it knows what's happening before we do." A chill ran through Elias. The thought that even their ship was part of the test was both fascinating and terrifying. Were they truly in control anymore? "Do we know what the next phase of this trial is?" Elias asked, though he already suspected the answer. "I'm not sure. But we'll find out soon enough," Sarah replied, her voice tinged with apprehension. Before anyone could respond, the voice reverberated again, echoing deep within the ship's structure, as if it was coming from every corner of the universe at once. "The test will now begin. Only one choice remains. The fate of your species rests upon it. Proceed with caution." A dark silence followed, filling the cabin with an unsettling tension. Everyone was on edge, waiting for the next piece of the puzzle to reveal itself. Elias swallowed hard. "What is the choice? What do we have to do?" The voice answered, but this time, there was something different about its tone, more cryptic, more sinister. "To pass the trial, one must prove the worth of their species. One of you must give up something dear, something irreplaceable. The others may choose their fates, but one must sacrifice. Failure to do so will result in annihilation." The crew was stunned into silence. Elias's heart hammered in his chest as the weight of the decision hit him. This wasn't just a physical test. It was a moral one. A test of humanity's ability to make the hardest choices, the ones that demanded a sacrifice. It was a test that forced them to face the very core of what they were willing to give up to survive. "Sacrifice," Cale muttered, his face pale. One of us has to give up something, something irreplaceable. But what? Elias paced the cockpit, his mind racing. What could he ask of his crew? What could they possibly sacrifice? Each one of them had families, dreams, and lives outside of this mission. To ask one of them to give up something so precious seemed wrong. But the consequences of refusal were dire. They could lose everything, their civilization, their future, destroyed without hesitation. I can't choose, Sarah whispered, her voice strained. None of us should have to make that decision. But the voice was relentless. The choice must be made. There is no time for hesitation. Elias closed his eyes, trying to steady his breath. He had to make a decision. They had come so far, but this test, this trial, was unlike anything they had ever imagined. It wasn't just about survival. It was about proving that humanity could rise above its flaws, that they were capable of making the hardest choice for the greater good. We don't have much time, Elias said, his voice barely above a whisper. We need to make this choice. The crew was silent, each one of them grappling with the heavy burden of the decision that lay before them. In the back of his mind, Elias knew there was no easy answer. There was no way to guarantee that humanity would pass this test. The only thing he could trust was their unity, their shared resolve. Captain, Cale said, his voice shaking, what if the choice isn't about one of us? What if it's about something else? Elias turned to Cale, his brow furrowed. What do you mean? What if the choice isn't about a single sacrifice? Cale continued, his voice gaining strength. What if it's about something larger, something humanity has to give up collectively? Sarah looked at Cale, a spark of realization dawning in her eyes. What if the sacrifice is the idea of self? What if the test is about letting go of our individual desires for the good of the species? Elias's eyes widened. Could it be? Was the trial asking them to let go of their egos, to sacrifice the very essence of who they were as individuals? He knew this was a turning point. It wasn't just about a single person. It was about all of them, as a collective species, stepping up to the challenge. This is it, Elias said, his voice firm with determination. The trial is asking us to give up what makes us human. Not a person, but the idea of separation. We must choose to stand as one, not as individuals. Sarah nodded slowly. That makes sense. The sacrifice isn't just a physical one, it's a mental one. We have to put aside everything that makes us unique, to act as one. The ship trembled as if it was responding to their realization, a low hum vibrating through the walls. The voice spoke once more. The choice is clear. If you wish to proceed, you must prove your unity. Sacrifice your separation, or face extinction. The challenge was set. The crew had made their decision, and now they had to act as one. Together, they would stand, or fall. Would they rise to the occasion, proving that humanity was more than just individuals, more than a collection of separate desires? Elias took a deep breath, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Prepare yourselves, he said, his voice unwavering. This is our moment to prove that we are worthy. The trial had begun, and the fate of humanity rested in their hands. The moment had arrived. The crew stood at the edge of an impossible decision, one that could change the very fabric of humanity. The voices in their minds were a swirling mix of doubt and determination. Could they truly give up their individuality for the greater good? Was it even possible to let go of everything they had known and cherished as separate beings? The ship vibrated ominously, as if echoing their internal conflict. It was as if the universe itself was watching them, waiting for the answer. They had no choice now but to move forward. The trial had been set in motion, and to fail was not an option. Elias stood at the helm, his hands gripping the controls with a steely resolve, yet inside, his mind raced. What do we do now? Sarah's voice broke through the thick silence, a question everyone was afraid to ask but knew had to be answered. Elias turned, meeting the gazes of his crew. Their faces were a mirror of his own thoughts, filled with fear, uncertainty, but also a spark of something deeper. A sense of unity had begun to form, a quiet understanding that their survival depended on this one moment. "We choose to act as one," Elias declared, his voice calm but unwavering. "We let go of our separateness and come together." Kale nodded in agreement. "We have to prove that we can work together as a single entity, that our species is capable of rising above its flaws." Sarah, ever the pragmatic one, spoke up next. "And what if that's not enough? What if the trial asks for something more?" The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of possibility. What if their best efforts, their shared resolve, weren't enough? Would they be allowed to survive? Or would their failure mean the end of humanity? "We don't have the luxury of doubt anymore," Elias said, his voice tightening with the pressure of their predicament. "We have to move forward. We have no other choice." The voice echoed once again, cutting through their conversation like a blade. "Prepare yourselves. The trial is complete. The final decision is yours." The walls of the ship seemed to shudder as if the universe itself was waiting for their response. The silence stretched out for what felt like an eternity. Then, suddenly, a flash of light filled the room, blinding them for a moment. The ship groaned in protest as its systems fluctuated wildly, as though it was being tested to its limits. "What's happening?" Kale shouted, his voice tinged with panic. "It's the final phase of the trial," Elias replied, his heart pounding in his chest. "We've crossed the threshold. Now, we have to prove we've learned the lesson." The lights flickered, and the room was bathed in an eerie glow. The voice returned, its tone now colder, almost mechanical. "Prove that you understand the cost of sacrifice. Only then will you be allowed to continue. One final test remains. Choose." A holographic screen appeared before them, displaying a series of images of their loved ones, their homes, their dreams. The faces of the people they had left behind flickered before their eyes. Each image was a reminder of what they stood to lose if they failed. But there was something else, something far more disturbing. A shadow loomed over the images, darkening their futures. In the center of it all, a single question was written in bold letters: "What are you willing to give up for survival?" Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the screen. The weight of the question settled over her like a suffocating cloud. It wasn't just a matter of sacrificing something. It was a matter of choosing what mattered most, and being willing to lose it all for the sake of the greater good. Elias stepped forward, his hand hovering over the console. He knew that whatever choice he made in this moment would define not just his future, but the future of every human being who had ever walked the earth. He could not falter. They could not falter. "This is it," Elias murmured, looking at his crew. "This is the final trial. We've learned that survival is not about individual glory. It's about what we are willing to give up, for each other, for humanity, for the future." Sarah's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she nodded slowly. "We have to do this together. No one person can make this decision alone." Elias placed his hand on the console. The final choice was at his fingertips, but it was not just his to make. It was the crew's decision, the decision of humanity itself. "We give up our separateness," Elias said firmly. "We let go of what makes us individual. We will survive as one, or we will not survive at all." The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over them. This was it. The crew stood together, unified in their resolve. They had made their choice. They had sacrificed their egos, their desires, their individual identities. The ship's systems hummed to life, its energy surging with newfound power. The holographic screen flickered, showing the faces of their loved ones once more. But this time, the shadow that had loomed over them dissipated, and the images began to shine with a bright, warm light. Their families, their homes, their future, everything they had fought for, was safe. "Congratulations," the voice echoed through the ship, its tone softer now, almost approving. "You have passed the final trial. Your species is worthy of survival." The ship's engines roared to life, and the crew felt the weight of the trial lift off their shoulders. They had succeeded. They had proven that humanity was capable of making the hardest choice, and in doing so, they had secured their future. But the victory was bittersweet. They had sacrificed so much, and yet, in that moment, they knew the true cost of survival. The room was still. The hum of the ship's engines had settled into a steady rhythm, but it was a far cry from the chaos that had preceded it. The crew sat together, each of them processing the events of the last few hours in their own way. The final trial was over, and humanity had survived, but at what cost? Elias leaned against the console, his eyes scanning the now peaceful surroundings. He was exhausted, physically and mentally. There were moments when the weight of their decision felt overwhelming, a heaviness he wasn't sure he could ever fully shake off. It had been the right choice, he reminded himself, but it didn't make the sacrifice any easier. "We did it," Sarah said quietly from across the room, her voice breaking the silence. She didn't ask if they were okay because she knew they weren't. There was no way to be okay after making a decision that had stripped them of everything they knew. "We did," Cale agreed, but his voice lacked the confidence it once had. He had changed. They all had. But was it for the better? The crew's eyes met, each silently acknowledging the difficulty of the path they had chosen. They had become a collective, no longer individuals with personal desires and ambitions. They were humanity now, in its most raw and unified form. And that unity had brought them through the trial, but it also came with its own challenges. The room felt smaller now, as though the air itself was thicker with the weight of their shared sacrifice. They were one, but that one had no room for the individuality they had once taken for granted. "I don't know if I can keep going like this," Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Her hands trembled slightly as she held her console, an uncomfortable feeling settling in her chest. "This whole thing, it's changed me. I don't feel like myself anymore." Elias understood. He felt it too. There was no returning to the way things had been before. There was no more me, only us. And that was both freeing and terrifying. But as he looked at his crew, he knew that they had made the right choice. Their survival had been secured because they had put humanity above themselves. The individual no longer mattered, only the collective. "I know," Elias said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions brewing within him. "It's hard. But this is our new reality. We've sacrificed our individuality, but in return, we've earned something much greater, our future." Cale nodded. "I still don't know if I can truly grasp what we gave up. I don't think any of us can. But I also know that we had to do it. For the sake of everyone." They all nodded in agreement, but deep down, they knew that the scars of this decision would stay with them forever. The cost of survival wasn't just physical, it was emotional, psychological, and spiritual. They had given up who they were to become something greater. Elias turned his attention to the ship's navigation systems. They had made it through the trial, but now they had to continue their journey. There was no going back now. They had already proven that humanity was capable of unity, and now it was time to prove that they could thrive as one. "Let's move forward," Elias said, his tone resolute. "We've earned our place. Now, we make sure we never forget why we're here, why we sacrificed everything." The ship's trajectory shifted, and the vast emptiness of space stretched before them. They were heading toward a new world, a new beginning. A world that would be shaped by the choices they had made here today. But it wasn't just their survival that mattered now. It was the survival of every human being who had ever walked the earth. As they ventured into the unknown, the crew's thoughts turned to the generations yet to come. They would never know the price of survival. But the crew did. And in that knowledge, they found a new sense of purpose. Humanity would rise again. Not as individuals, but as one. As the ship drifted into the vast unknown, Elias couldn't help but feel the weight of everything they had endured. The stars outside seemed distant, as if even the universe itself was too far removed from the journey they had just taken. The echoes of their decision, the collective sacrifice, the loss of who they were, still rang loudly in the back of his mind. Yet, as he stood there, staring at the endless black expanse before them, he realized something that should have been clear from the beginning: survival wasn't just about living. It was about learning how to live differently. The trials had been a test, of strength, of unity, of sacrifice. And in the end, it wasn't the physical challenges that had made them worthy of survival. It was their capacity for selflessness. They had come together as one, forging something stronger than the sum of their individual parts. And now, they had the chance to build something new. A future. A world. Elias? Sarah's voice broke through his thoughts, bringing him back to the present. She had been quiet for the last few hours, the stillness of the moment giving her space to reflect. Do you think we made the right choice? Elias turned to face her, taking in the uncertainty in her eyes. She wasn't alone in her doubts, each of them had wrestled with the consequences of their decision. It had been a difficult thing to accept, the notion that they had sacrificed so much for the survival of the species. But there was no turning back. The future was theirs to shape now. I don't know, Elias replied, his voice carrying the weight of their shared experience. I think that's the hardest part. We may never know if we made the right choice. But we made a choice, and it was the only one we could make. And now, we have to make the best of it. Kale, who had been silently monitoring the systems from his station, spoke up. I think the real test starts now. We've proven that we can survive. But can we thrive? Can we live in this new reality we've created? The question hung in the air, a reminder of how much more they had yet to face. Their world had changed. But could they, as individuals and as a collective, change with it? Elias looked at his crew. Each of them had been shaped by the trials they had endured. And though they had given up their individuality, they had gained something much more powerful in return. They had become something stronger, something greater than themselves. And as they set their course for a new world, he felt a surge of hope. They had survived not just the test, but the challenges that came with it. They had proven that humanity, when united, could overcome anything. We'll figure it out, Elias said, his voice resolute. We'll build a new future. We've earned it. The crew exchanged glances, a shared understanding passing between them. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were pioneers, forging a path into the unknown. And as they looked out at the stars once again, they knew that their journey was far from over. It was just beginning. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the crew felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the kind of peace they had once known, a quiet, individual peace where they could live their lives as they saw fit. No, this peace was different. It was a collective peace, born of sacrifice, struggle, and unity. They had come through the darkest trials imaginable, and they had emerged stronger for it. The ship continued its course, the stars ahead beckoning them toward their new home. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: humanity's true strength wasn't in its individual accomplishments. It was in its ability to come together and fight for something greater than itself. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them as one. They had passed the ultimate test. And now, they would rise, not as individuals, but as a united species, ready to build the future they had earned.